John Wick versus the Punisher. The war that would destroy an entire city. If John Wick and the Punisher ever went to war, the city wouldn't survive it, because this wouldn't be a superhero fight. No glowing laser, no magic, no speeches, just two men with military-level discipline, weaponized trauma, and absolutely nothing left to lose. One fights with precision, the other fights with rage. And honestly, that difference changes everything, because Frank Castle wants punishment, but John Wick wants efficiency. And when unstoppable rage meets perfect control, someone disappears first. Most people think these two characters are similar. They're not. The Punisher fights like a war veteran, trying to destroy evil through fear. John Wick fights like a machine, built to erase targets before panic even begins. Frank Castle is chaos with military training. John Wick is calmness turned into a weapon. And that's why this battle feels terrifying, because both men understand something normal people don't. The brain loses fights before the body does. Part 1. The difference between a killer and a soldier. Before the fight even begins, you need to understand something important. John Wick and Frank Castle were built differently. The Punisher was forged through war. John Wick was engineered through assassination, and psychologically, those are completely different mindsets. Frank Castle fights emotionally, not recklessly, but emotionally. Every bullet carries anger. Every fight carries pain. Every enemy reminds him of what he lost. That's why the Punisher feels terrifying, because he fights like a man who already died emotionally years ago. But John Wick is colder, much colder. John doesn't fight for emotion. He fights for completion. That's why his movements feel robotic, minimal, efficient, controlled. He doesn't waste energy. He doesn't chase fear. He creates silence. And honestly, that's what makes him dangerous. Because if these two men entered the same city, only one of them would stay hidden. The other would become the hunter. And once John Wick becomes the hunter, people stop surviving mistakes. Part 2. Why John Wick fights like a machine. Here's something most people never notice. John Wick almost never looks angry during fight. His breathing stays controlled. His face stays calm. His movements stay efficient, even under pressure. And psychologically, that's terrifying, because emotional fighters become predictable. John Wick doesn't. He moves like someone who already calculated the outcome before entering the room. That's why his fights feel different from normal action movies. No flashy movement, no dramatic pauses, no wasted motion. Everything flows forward, like a system executing command. And here's where things get darker. John Wick doesn't just fight people. He destroys momentum. The second enemies panic, the fight is already over, because Wick understands psychological pressure better than almost anyone. That's why entire rooms freeze when his name is mentioned. Fear spreads before he even arrives. But Frank Castle is different. Fear doesn't stop him. Pain doesn't stop him, and that changes the entire war. Part 3. The Punisher is controlled rage. Frank Castle doesn't move like an assassin. He moves like a soldier still trapped in combat mode. Everything about him feels heavier, louder, more aggressive, and honestly, that's why people fear him. Because Frank doesn't just eliminate criminals, he punishes them psychologically. And here's the terrifying part. The Punisher doesn't care about survival the way normal people do. That makes him unpredictable, because men with nothing left to lose become extremely dangerous. Unlike John Wick, Frank Castle wants criminals to feel fear before the end comes. That changes his entire combat psychology. John Wick removes targets quickly. Frank Castle breaks morale first. And if these two men collided, their mentalities would clash before the bullets even started flying. Part 4. The city would become a war zone. Now imagine this scenario. A criminal organization places a massive bounty on Frank Castle. Every assassin refuses the contract, except one, John Wick. The second this happened, New York changes overnight, because now the city contains the world's deadliest assassin and a soldier who refuses to die. People start disappearing. Safe houses get compromised. Entire criminal networks go silent. Nobody knows who's hunting who anymore. And honestly, that uncertainty becomes the scariest part, because both men understand surveillance. Both understand strategy. Both understand psychological warfare. And both know one terrifying truth. The first mistake ends everything. Part 5. Who would actually win? This is where things become complicated, because physically, both are dangerous. Mentally, both are elite. But psychologically, they fight for completely different reasons. The Punisher fights because pain drives him forward. John Wick fights because discipline controls him. And in prolonged wars, discipline usually outlasts emotion. That's why John Wick feels so terrifying. He doesn't become reckless under pressure. He becomes quieter, more focused, more efficient. But there's one problem John Wick would face against Frank Castle. Pain doesn't slow him down. The Punisher adapts. Sometimes it makes him more dangerous. This means John Wick, because Frank Castle already lives in psychological darkness. And honestly, that creates a terrifying balance. One man is perfect control. The other is controlled rage.